Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the SubQuery Investor Series. This is where we talk to some of the investors behind SubQuery about what they're most excited about and why they got involved with the team at SubQuery. And I'm joined today by Gokul Rajaram, who is one of our main investors. He's been with us for some time, and it's a pleasure to have you here today to talk to us.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
Why don't we start with a bit of a background? You've had a lot of experience with a lot of different companies in Silicon Valley. You know, there's a number of different names there that many people recognize. Why don't you start with giving us a bit of a background?
Absolutely. I worked at Google many years ago. It's now, my goodness, almost 2 decades since I was at Google. I led a product called Google AdSense, which became Google's ad network. From there, I started a company which was bought by Facebook. So after Google, I spent time at Facebook where I ran the Facebook ads product team. And after Facebook, I joined a company called Square, which is a leader in payments and point of sale. And I worked on point of sale at Square and also ran a food delivery business called Caviar, which was bought by a company called DoorDash, which is a food delivery and logistics service where I work today. And I also sit on the boards of a few public companies such as Coinbase, Pinterest, and a couple of other companies. And really excited to be here today.
If you look at the history of these companies you worked with, right, you're talking about payment space, food delivery space, you know, Web3. What kind of characterizes why you got involved with each of those industries?
It's what is interesting about these spaces is that all of these are infrastructure companies in some ways. And even though they are somewhat on the back end, they are pivotal in the mainstream adoption of technology or of something by people. And the same way with SubQuery, when I first got involved with Web3, it became clear to me that infrastructure solutions would be pivotal in getting blockchain adopted in a mainstream way. Infrastructure is often the biggest distraction and a huge burden when it comes to focusing on the core use case and how to scale without any hiccups. Many times, infrastructure projects are not the sexiest blockchain projects. However, they're critical. And that's very similar to many of the companies I've worked at, where the stuff they do is, if you look at Google, even though it looks like, oh, it's an easy search engine, a lot of the work is in the back, the infrastructure that was built over decades, which has now allowed them to just have an incredibly fast and relevant search engine. I think the same for blockchain. I think they are critical. And I think blockchain in particular, you could argue, in the Web3 industry is somewhat tumultuous and volatile. So infrastructure products are even more critical in this industry.
Also, looking back at your history, right, you've done a lot of roles that kind of straddle the product engineering side and the product management side as well, which is an interesting kind of combination where you kind of work on the code as well, but also on deciding what to build. Is that something you particularly enjoy doing?
Yeah, I think it's almost stemmed from day one when my first job was at a company called Juno, where I joined as an engineer, but there were no product managers at the company. And I was directly talking to customers. There was no designers either. I mean, for some reason, we didn't have designers. We just had developers. And so I would do the HTML mockups. I would write a PRD, and I would then code the actual design. And so I enjoyed doing the end-to-end work and talking to customers. And that's something that I've really tried to do as much as possible. Harder and harder, but it's really fun.
You've recently got involved with Web3, you know, through your board of directors at Coinbase, and of course, being an advisor to SubQuery. What's your view of the Web3 industry as a whole, and where do you think kind of world's going in terms of the adoption of Web3?
I think Web3 is one of the things. Its premise is it's going to make money overall frictionless and easy to use globally. There's a lot of friction across borders, even within countries. There's a lot of taxes levied on money transfer, and it's not democratic fully. And I think that's the promise of Web3. And I think obviously beyond money, beyond finance, there are lots of use cases of the fundamental blockchain technology, the distributed architecture that it has. And I think underlying all of this is having the right infrastructure that can scale, that's done right. And I think that's without that, the industry is not going to reach its full potential.
You're involved with many, you know, companies large and small in the space. I know you're pretty active in Silicon Valley. Is there like a common thread of advice or suggestions that you often provide smaller growing companies about how they can optimize what they're doing or how they can better serve their customers?
The number one piece of advice I give to companies is stay close to your customers as you grow. Many times what happens is companies start with a very customer centric viewpoint because even the founders are very close to the customers. As the company grows, there are layers that come between the founders and engineers and others, between them and the customers, and they assume that they understand the customers, but turns out customer needs evolve and change with time. It's very important. Just because you found product market fit once with one segment of customers doesn't mean you can just say, okay, I'm done and I'm going to keep building the product, because product market fit is a dynamic thing and it changes with different segments of customers. So it's a really good best practice for founders, product developers, product managers, engineers, everybody to meet with different segments of customers on a weekly basis at the very least, to really understand how customer needs have evolved and just to stay rooted in what matters for companies, which is serving customer needs.
I've been involved with like B2B companies and B2C companies. SubQuery is kind of in the middle of both. But it's always interesting that I find that, B2B customers, when you're trying to get your first 3 or 4 big customers, they're the critical ones to start that growth spurt. And you kind of, the 3 or 4 you move heaven and earth to get them on board. But you kind of, when you get older and older as you go, you want to be less and less kind of specific and bespoke to your new customers. And that's always, I always find that's an interesting transition that a lot of companies kind of struggle with, is how to make product market fit. How do the right amount of product market fit for a specific customer you're trying to sign on?
That's right. You're almost like a consulting service, you could argue, for the first couple of customers, because you're working closely with them. That's why they're called design partners. They're not even called customers because they're partners. They're helping design or shape your product. And then after the first 2 or 3 customers, if the 4th customer, that's why you want to try to serve common use cases even across multiple customers. Because if you're serving many, many different use cases, it is harder then to know what the 4th customer is going to use it for. And so you try to have some commonality between your customers, either a use case commonality or an industry commonality or something else that you can then extrapolate to next set of customers.
That's an interesting point. What's your view around an early stage, company or startup going too deep into one feature or just being too light in multiple features? Solving one problem really
I would
well.
say instead of feature, I would say solving a customer problem. It's good to be too deep into solving a narrow niches problem to start with. I think Facebook is a great example, right? They solved a problem for college students really, really well for a couple of years before they branched off for maybe you could just say Harvard students really well, and then other colleges, and then more colleges, and then ultimately they came. And I think this is true for almost every great company where you want to solve a very specific problem for a specific segment and do it really, really well versus being spread too thin, solving many problems for many different segments of customers.
So back to SubQuery, Gokul. What excites you the most about what SubQuery are doing?
Look, I think when I first got involved with Web3, it became clear that infrastructure is going to be pivotal to adoption of blockchain. Infrastructure, in many cases for blockchain developers, is one of the biggest distractions. It's a huge burden because you can't just spin up an instance like you can with AWS, and you start, instead of focusing on your core use case and what you're building, you start figuring out infrastructure and how to fix it and how do you scale without hiccups. And I know infrastructure projects are not necessarily the coolest, sexiest projects. However, there's no doubt in my mind they're critical, especially in blockchain, in Web3, where there's a lot more tumultuousness and volatility compared to the broader internet industry or software industry. So it makes sense, in my opinion, for a company that's focused on the critical components to make sure they're done right. And then you can add more bells and whistles on top of it. And when I came across SubQuery, I knew they were onto something. And once I delved deeper, I understood how compelling a platform it is.
Do you see parallels between Web3 or SubQuery specifically and other teams and other companies or other industries that you've worked in or engaged with in the past?
I think I do, because in general, you find that if you look at Web3, there's a lot of blockchains that have come up, and developers need a way to stay above that, I think you could see the same thing in the rise of cloud platforms like AWS, Azure, and GCP. And you as a developer want that to be abstracted away from you. You don't have to worry about that. So that if you want to switch from AWS to GCP, you can do that easily. I think SubQuery, with its cross-chain indexing solution and really the embrace of multi-chain broadly, I think it's a very good parallel where it's a layer that abstracts some of that away and allows developers to efficiently access data across multiple blockchains.
So Gokul, if I managed to teleport you back in time to meet you at a much younger age, or meet someone just like you at a much younger age, getting started in tech, what advice would you give them?
Okay, the number one advice I would give is be curious and leave yourself open. Number two would be leave yourself open to serendipity. When you're naturally curious, you ask why things are a certain way. And you many times come across, oh, it's a certain way because people never thought to ask a deeper question of why can't it be made better? And try to build stuff just for the sake of building versus trying to start a company. Most of the best, and in fact, almost every project, every great company I've been involved with, it started out as it's just a tool to solve my problem. So when you find a problem in the world, even if it's something that only you encounter, try to build something to solve it, and you'll experience joy and pleasure in the act of building. And sometimes when you become a company, sometimes it doesn't. But just by solving the problem, you'll build skills that you're going to use throughout your life. So learn how to build stuff is probably the other one. Be curious, learn how to build stuff, and open yourself to serendipity. Put yourself out there, share stuff, build in public, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, etc., on social network of your choice.
It's interesting you use the term serendipity, right? Are you a believer that, there's many opportunities flowing by in time, but there is a certain chance that something might happen? Or
Absolutely. It's not for a certain, and you need to be prepared and ready to seize it. But if you don't make sure that you're opening yourself to opportunity and taking the right steps, for example, going to meetups, going to hackathons, meeting with interesting people, you'll never know of those opportunities. So you need to put yourselves in situations that have a high probability of a chance collision with a co-founder or with a company or with a project that you get excited about and start working on. If you're just sitting and working without engaging with other people, in situations that can lead to those. I'll give you an example. At Google, I was initially put on a project called syndication of search, where I was just essentially working on how Google search is syndicated to other websites. We had signed a deal with AOL and others, and I was a product manager on that. And then at 6 p.m. every day, after my work was done, I would just walk around the Google offices, and a few doors down, I met a group of engineers who were working on a product that essentially was, they were working closely with Sergey, the co-founder of Google, and their goal was to really take a web page and figure out what ads to show on the web page using Google search index to figure out what topics are relevant. And that product, I was like, hey, what are you working on? They were like, this thing. It's like, do you have a product manager? No. Can I work with you on it? Aren't you working on this other thing? Yeah, but I can do this as a part-time thing. And I started working with them as their product manager. And ultimately that became AdSense, and I moved to that full-time. I would never have done that if I had not just gone and just asked people and was curious and just said, raised my hand to say, I want to join this thing. I want to work on this. So don't be afraid of taking on more than you can chew. And imposter syndrome is real. All of us have it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. I was probably singularly unqualified to work with those amazing engineers, but it didn't deter me from saying, yeah, I can do that. I can do both. I can be the PM of two different things at the same time. And I somehow managed it, and it was a great outcome.
Excellent. Wise words from a wise man. Thank you very much, Gokul, for imparting that knowledge with us today. And it was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you, James. Pleasure is all mine.
It was nice to meet you again. And thank you very much for joining.
Awesome.